Welcome to the Enterprise Builders Podcast, powered by P3, where we feature top industry leaders discussing what it takes to build a profitable company and stay on top. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Scott Swearingen, co-host of the Enterprise Builders Podcast, where we sit down with business owners, executives, franchisees, accountants, and more to discuss how top businesses are thriving in today's economy. Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by P3 Cost Analysts. Since 1991, P3 has been helping businesses and government entities across the United States determine if their non-payroll related expenses are accurate and cost effective. With a team of the industry's leading utility, telecom, waste and recycling, uniform and linen, managed print auditors, P3 has helped save their clients hundreds of millions of dollars. Their experienced auditors have helped tens of thousands of businesses from small business to Fortune 500. To learn more, visit costanalysts.com. Today's guest is Benjamin Dunn. He is a Chief Executive Officer for Brookshire International Academy, where he has devoted the last 12 plus years championing the Dean of Education role. He has extensive experience in running an innovative, cutting-edge distance education program through an online private high school for over 2,000 students spread across the United States. Benjamin has an educational background, earning his PhD in theology and a doctorate in divinity from Seminary, ATULC. Benjamin's fascination with education began during his entrepreneurial experience in the satellite industry, where he noticed a great discrepancy in the number of educational opportunities available to those in underserved communities and the effect it had on the workforce he employed. In 2009, he saw a greater need for innovation in education and founded Brookshire International Academy. From the first classroom with 5 students in San Diego, California, to now over 2,000 adult learners in 7 states, he has shown tireless dedication to the goal of eliminating the cycle of poverty one student at a time. He has a lot of significant professional experiences as the Dean of Education with Brookshire International Academy. He created several tools to help his company evolve through the COVID-19 pandemic. He created systems to evaluate the Department of Education's educational requirements and expected learning outcomes, and works tirelessly to provide reporting to the sites Brookshire partners with more accurately and timely. Benjamin is also a family man who enjoys spending time with his wife, young daughter, pets, as well as playing games on his computer. He has a large extended family, including grandchildren. Benjamin, thank you for joining today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing great. Just looking forward to visiting with you about your experiences and what's led you to being here today with us. So thank you for joining the Enterprise Builders Podcast.
Absolutely.
So let's just jump right into it, Benjamin. How exactly did you get started in education?
So I started in education by partnering with a couple of individuals, a retired military staff sergeant and his father out in San Diego. Through the satellite industry, my previous iteration of life, I discovered that I was having a really difficult time finding qualified and well-educated or trained people to work for us. And I started talking to a bunch of different business owners at the Chamber of Commerce and other places. And we all were struggling with the same thing. We had a whole lot of people who just simply didn't have a lot of educational opportunity. And it was very specific. At that time, what we were looking at is people who, from the military recruiter that we worked with, he was finding that there were a lot of kids wanting to join the military, but they hadn't graduated from high school, and there were some regulatory changes. And then other business owners were saying, look, we're trying to hire people, but they haven't graduated from high school. They don't have the skills, the basic skills necessary to, from a McDonald's franchise owner talking about being able to make change to, any number of other things. And so I really started looking at what can be done to fix this problem. And so at that time, we decided to open the private high school, Brookshire International Academy. Back in 2008, we had 5 whole students. It was 2 young ladies and 3 young men who wanted to join the military. They were all over the age of 18, but fairly young. Wanted to join the military, but they didn't have a high school diploma. They didn't have a GED. They couldn't go get college credits because, of course, they didn't have the prerequisites for that. So we opened the school and we started working with those students and got them to where they were graduated from high school and able to enroll in to join the military. A couple of them moved past that into other things, but it really gave us a focus on the population that for whatever reason, and a lot of times, they're not great reasons. It could be that they've been incarcerated. It could be that they were, pregnant at a young age and weren't able to finish school. It could be a lot of times what we see, students whose family are suffering, much like now in these economic times, where their families are suffering and they have no choice. They're going to drop out of high school and they're going to go to work. They're going to start helping support their family. So,
Wow.
That was my start in the education industry.
So let me back up. So when you're talking about satellite industry where you were at previously, are we talking like actual satellites up in the sky beaming information around? Is that the type of satellites we're talking about?
So yes and no. So my part of that was whenever the first 18-inch dishes came out. So you'll remember the big companies, DirecTV,
Sure.
Dish Network, Ecosphere.
Yep.
When those first came out, back whenever I was very fresh out of college, I got presented with an opportunity to franchise with DirecTV in a specific rural area that I was working in. And did top sales for 6 months.
Yeah.
That was my...
I think what's fascinating to me, Benjamin, is it looks like obviously your career now came out of that problem that you saw from being in that other industry. I'm guessing there was probably a time where there was some overlap where you might have been working on the school, also still working on the satellites. Was that the case?
No. So for me, when I realized this need, the satellite company, I sold it to actually my mother and father, and then ran it for many years until he passed away. But at that time, I knew, based on what we were seeing, and again, this was in rural America, right? We're not talking about big cities. We're talking about little towns with 800-900 people. But what we were seeing at that time, and in hindsight, I think there are some other things going on in the world that we were seeing without recognizing what it was. But I knew that it was going to take 100% of my focus to be able to figure out how to make this work. Because one of the issues, and again, you talk about education as an industry. One of the big issues is the government is spending lots of money, somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000 a year to put these kids through public school. They couldn't afford that. Their families couldn't afford that, right? Our tax dollars pay for that, but then they weren't able to take advantage of that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And to run a school that would actually give them the opportunity to work 24 hours a day, big thing for us. We need if my student needs to come in and take an exam at 2:00 in the morning, we need to have accessibility for them where they can, log onto the computer, get a proctor online with them, be able to visualize their surroundings, hear what's going on, and make sure that it's, it's them and that there's ethics involved in what's happening with their program. But we have students, and many of them, who 2:00 in the morning is the only time they can do this. They've got to get their kids in bed, they've got to get their chores done, they've got to get off work, whatever it is. So, I knew at that time that it was going to be both an uphill battle, but something that was going to take all of my time. So the only kind of overlap in that would be, as we graduated students, we would oftentimes be able to put them to work for the satellite company or other people that we knew. We'd be able to help them in that last step of eliminating the cycle of poverty, being able to help them find work.
Sure. I mean, that had to have been, an exciting time, kind of nerve-wracking time, making that transition, building the school. Get like, hey, can you talk me or walk me through those early days when you talked about you had 5 students to start out to now you've got over 2,000? Let's focus on those early days. What can you tell me about kind of the environment that you were in, where your headspace was, those building days that really set the table for where you're at today?
Terrified. This is the word I will use first. Terrified. First of all, I had plenty of lots of black hair, and that quickly went away, and we got a lot of less hair and turned gray. But those first days were terrifying. There were so many unanswered questions that we had to discover the answers to. From where are we going to find, like, we could look at the statistics, we could look at the demographic information provided by the government, the census, the state, and even the county, and say, okay, we have 50,000 students that need our help. Now, how do I get to them, right? That was the biggest and first problem that we went through so many things, from hiring young kids with sandwich boards to walk up and down the sidewalks near the trolley stops and bus stations, to, joining every street market we could find in the lower income sections of town, and this was in 2008. The internet was a much different animal, right? So, AOL messages to people we could find. Facebook was still fairly fresh. So, there was a little bit of that going on. But overall, our hardest, and to this day, it hasn't changed, but the hardest thing was, how do we find that magic point where putting skin in the game by the student keeps them motivated to do what they need to do, while at the same time doesn't take formula or diapers or food out of their mouths. And so there's always that was our biggest, and to this day, again, we deal with this daily. It's our biggest, fear factor or hurdle to overcome, because again, we cannot depend on the state or federal government to give us a bunch of money to help these kids. Their feeling is, we've already helped them once and it didn't happen, so why should we do it again? Which kind of makes sense. But at the same time, we reach out to the community, other business owners, and then of course, we have partners with vocational schools. So and what we found in that very beginning, some of the scariest parts of it, looking at what the regulations say. What do you have to graduate from high school? How do we meet those requirements? What do we have to do? The law is very clear about certain things. You don't have to do this, but you do have to do that. But then if you don't do what they say you don't have to do, then other people look at you and they're like, oh no, we don't like that because you're not doing this thing. Well, I don't have to, but again, you kind of have to go through that. So things like accreditation, things like, verbiage in your contracts. We discovered there's a whole lot of stuff, even though we received no federal funds as far as Titles 1 through 18 dealing with finance for education. There are a lot of things that we could be held liable for just based on those titles, even though we're not, involved in that. And so a big part of it for me was kind of terrifying. I have to tell you, when I was presented the opportunity with the satellite thing, I really met this guy, Mark. He was a great guy. I went to his office. It took us 5 minutes. We signed a couple of pieces of paper, and the next thing you know, things are just blowing up. Easiest thing in the world. Just fell into it, and it was lovely, and I absolutely loved it. This, on the other hand, every day I had to learn something new. Every day there was something that I had to find a way to get past. And so, we dealt with, transportation for the students. How do we even get them to the school? So we had to relocate, actually. One of the very first things we did from our first classroom, we relocated to an area where there was a transit stop right outside the school, so that we were able to then better get those students to where we needed to be, and so in those beginning days, it was a lot of fear, I think every day, or maybe anxiety, a better word. Are we going to be able to survive till tomorrow? Right.
Right.
That was a big thing. And I mean, especially when we only had 5 students, very, I would say quickly, although not quickly in the grand scheme of things, but very quickly, within about 8 months, we had ourselves up to 90 students. We were running 3 sessions a day, starting at 6 o'clock in the morning and ending at 10 o'clock at night. And so that was, giving a lot. And at that point, we were nowhere near 24 hours a day. We were still bringing them into a classroom. Online wasn't really much happening there. So it was, and then that, the technology behind how to make this work.
Right.
Was a big, that was a big hurdle for us, finding the technology that would work, that was also user friendly enough that the students would be able to survive in that environment. And specifically our demographic, right? Students who didn't graduate from high school, the chances of them having had a lot of experience dealing with a computer, or even at that time, smartphones, it was very small. And so, we had to figure out, how do we get them, keep it as stupid simple as you can.
Yeah.
We had to figure out how to do that every day.
So we identified the problem, right? With trying to find good help. We started jumping into it. We worked through kind of some of those terrifying moments. We started getting kids in the classroom. You went from 5 to 90 fairly quickly. Let's talk about kind of maybe where that turning point was. I know that obviously starting in 2008 to where we are today, technology has, I'm sure, provided you with a platform that makes it look maybe a little bit differently than it did during those early days. Can you talk about maybe where one of those turning points, or maybe the biggest turning point for you, if you can think back, can you reflect and just find one that was kind of a big turning point, or is it just kind of one of those gradual snowball things that really just kind of happened over time?
Over time, there have been massive turning points for both me individually, but for the school as well. One of the first turning points that we really had was when we really stopped focusing so much on students that wanted to join the military, and we started really focusing on that underserved, poverty-stricken population, that we realized it was a lot more than just ones that wanted to go to the military. And a big turning point for us was that we had several of our students who were in the welfare to work program, which is kind of like receiving cash aid, SNAP, TANF, that kind of thing. I'm sure the names are all different now because they change all the time, but they were at that time, they were receiving benefits of some kind. It could be childcare, it could be whatever. And what we discovered is that the welfare to work agencies out here where we were in California, were more than happy to throw those students our way. And it, that was a huge turning point for us, even though there was no, fiduciary assistance there. What they would do is they would work with these students, these young people, and say, look, you don't have a high school diploma, which is going to make it really hard for you to get off of this system of care. So why don't you go talk to Brookshire? And that made a big turning point for us, was when that happened with and there were many welfare to work agencies out here because it's such a large population of people. But when they reached out to us, and then it even went as we grew, again getting a little further past that 90 students, in about 2010 and 11, they said, okay, look, we just want to give you a room here at our facility, and there are a bunch of computers there, and we want you to let the students come here and work. And by then we had started getting into the technology and discovering what we could and couldn't do and how we could make that work. And then, so that gave us an opportunity for even further growth, was having those, classrooms. And then, another major turning point, one of the largest vocational training schools in the nation saw what we were doing, came in and asked us, hey, we see what you're doing. Kind of explain to us, walk through this, how this works. We ran a pilot program with them at several of their campuses out here in California. And, it's the point at which the school became national as far as the population of students we serve, because that pilot went so well that they came back to us and said, look, we've got, 17 campuses in 5 different states, and we want you to run your high school in every one of them. So we're going to put a room in those campuses. We want you to get as many students as you can from, Florida and Georgia and Texas and Arizona and Washington and Oklahoma and just, we want to try to help as many people as we can. And that really made, for us as an institution, that was the largest turning point. Just being recognized by somebody that we didn't even know, we didn't even know they were looking at us. It was just somehow someone we knew them, and they said, we want this. And so,
it sounds to me like you might have, I guess you would have been considered kind of an early adopter to remote learning. Would you say that was fair?
Absolutely.
So there probably wasn't a whole lot of, I guess, plug and play, let's say software packages or, curriculum that you could just bring in. I'm sure there was probably a lot of stuff that you were building while you're building your school, right?
Yes. Absolutely. At that time, now there are several curriculum providers across the nation that love to get you to sign up for their curriculum. I spent from 2011 until 2017. We couldn't find anybody to provide a curriculum. There was no one out there. So everything we did, we would have to go and it, an interesting way it worked. If I have 500 students and I'm building an English class based off of Houghton Mifflin's English book, I got to go buy 500 books and then have all of the stuff put online. And then, there was no way to just do digital. Now, even now, the textbooks, you can license them from them digitally, and it's an entirely different animal than it was in these early days. But we spent many, many thousands of hours building out curriculum, stuff that from English classes to math classes to science to social studies, and finding the right people, who and at that time, even now, and the pandemic has really brought this to light across the nation in ways that we find to be kind of almost funny. It's not, because of course it just shines a huge light on problems, but it's things we've already dealt with, right? And we went through this, we knew what was coming. And so what we see is things like, I can't go down here to, one of the high schools and say, hey, I need a 9th grade science teacher for environmental science. I need you to do this thing. I want to make some videos. I want you to give me some tests. I want you to give me some quizzes. And they're like, what? You want to do what? We don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And so, it was a big thing for us, is finding that. Now, of course, that changed. Now all of our curriculum comes directly from the school district. It's all digital. It's costs money, but it's already there, right? And they've provided that, and then we add some tools to that. So but in the beginning, that was a big hurdle, because there was nothing.
So I'm guessing that kind of that transition within what's available to you being more broad, more accessible, it's probably allowed you more time to focus on identifying those students, identifying partners that can bring those students to you to really help you grow your enrollment. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. It is fair to say that it has given me more of an opportunity to do that. Not very successfully. I'll just be honest about that. When we find, our partner schools are very unique in the fact that they are willing to work with this demographic, which is one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome. We've had many conversations with, potential partners to work with us in helping our students in eliminating this cycle of poverty through education. And a lot of times what we run into is that at the end of the day, the staff or executives or whoever it may be that make those decisions just say, well, we don't want those people here. We don't want to deal with the, and it's a lot. You have to be passionate about what we do because, the students are, they've seen a lack of success multiple times in their lives. And so one of the things we focus a lot on is celebrating every little success. And I mean little success. You passed a quiz in your basic math class.
Right.
You get a success. Hey, here's a little badge for you. We want to celebrate with you. One of the staff is actually going to email you or text you and say, hey, great job. Keep up the good work. That was a phenomenal thing. And it might seem a little bit like overkill to the outside. But what we've discovered over these many years is that if we will celebrate even the smallest success with that student, it enhances their motivation to continue driving towards that ultimate goal, right?
Sure. And I'm guessing a lot of these students previously might not have had any educational successes or much successes to celebrate, maybe even outside of education too.
Absolutely.
So even if they might be small, those I understand what you're talking about, and I commend you and your staff for celebrating those successes, whether they're small or big. So let's kind of continue on some of that. Can you talk about maybe some of your favorite success stories that you've had during your career, or at the school or with your students? Can you talk about some of your favorite stories?
Sure. So there are a couple that I really always keep in mind. So I in this industry and dealing with our demographic, you get 10 or 12 students every day who want to scream and yell and call you names and do everything in their power to try to get you to give them something for nothing. And so you always hold on to the ones that every graduate, they matter. It's my staff will laugh because they'll say a name from 5 years ago. And I'm like, I remember them. And they're like, but there's 14,000 of these students. How do you remember that person? Because I hold on to those stories. So like, I'll give you this example. So we had a lady, this was way back in the early days, right? I believe it was 2009. I had a lady walk into my office, 85 years old, walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and she says, I need to graduate from high school. And honestly, I was shocked. I looked across the desk at her and I'm like, okay, why do you need to graduate from high school? What's going on with you?
It's not every day you have an 85-year-old enrolling, I'm guessing.
No, well, it's a little more often than you would think sometimes.
Okay.
I said, what? Why are you doing this? And she said, look, I have 17 grandchildren, not one of which is currently going to graduate from high school. They are dropping out like flies. And she said, look, I'm retired. I have a couple of houses, a business I run, renting houses. She says, and I have everything I need in life. And when my grandkids and I tell them, you need to finish school, and they come back to me with, why, Grandma? You never did. And she said, and I can't get past that argument. She said, so I want to go to high school. I said, okay, it's going to be the same for you as it is. This was my first experience dealing with an older student in my school. I said, it's going to be the same thing for you that it's going to be for everybody else. You got to do the same classes, whatever. She had never attended. She had dropped out of school in the 6th grade, so she had never even made it that far. So there was some remediation we had to do. Then we had to get her through the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade classes, and so needless to say, she works her way through the program diligently, comes to class every day, never misses a day. Like, she is the ideal perfect student, right?
Wow.
I'm like, well, this is super cool. So at that time, we were still only in San Diego, only local, right? And there was a church right next to our school, and they would allow us to use their facilities a couple of times a year to hold a graduation ceremony for all of our students who had graduated in the previous time. And so, we're getting ready for the graduation ceremony. Everybody's putting their caps and gowns on, and I go up on the stage, and we're handing out the diplomas, and she happened to be the last one. Her last name started with a Z, so she was the last one to come across the stage. And as she walked across the stage, and I handed her diploma, and she had been hugging her teachers next, and she got to me, and she looked at me, and she hugged me, and she turned around, and she held up her diploma. And what I had not recognized in all of this time, the first two rows on the left side were full of nothing but her grandkids. And she turned around and said to every last one of them, I have my high school diploma. You have no excuse. Every last one of those 17 kids enrolled in my school and finished.
Wow.
Those kind of things are what we hold on to through all of the bad, through the students that drop, through the students that quit, through the, whatever it may happen, we hold on to those.
That's a real pointed story, right? That just talks to your mission about breaking that cycle of poverty. And with her enrolling at the age of 85 and having that many children waiting on that, basically, who knows what might have happened had she not made that decision. And then who knows what might not have happened if those 17 didn't. I mean, that's a great success story. Can you talk about any major challenges professionally that you've had to overcome during your time? Anything you want to share? If not, we can move on. But any kind of major challenges that you've overcome?
There's been quite a few challenges. I think the biggest one, and I won't say that we've overcome it, it's still a challenge for us. The biggest one is finding partners who are willing to work with the students that we want to serve. It's the easiest thing for me to do to find a partner school, vocational training school, or college, community college, welfare to work agency, places that want to work with us, but only if we have the perfect student, right? And if I had the perfect student, then we wouldn't be who we are, right? Because those perfect students are just not, and it's not to say that 100% of our students are in that situation. But I think the challenges that we face are both that, finding the people who are willing to help us support and grow these students. That's a big one for us. And then, still to this day, and I love my staff. I have many staff members who have been with me for many years now. But I tell you, they're difficult to find because it requires that they are passionate about what they're doing. And, it requires a special kind of person, someone who can overlook the bad to hold on to the good. And that's not the easiest thing in the world, right? That a lot of times the negatives surrounding you will overwhelm you. And so, I've transitioned over time, right? Whenever I first started, I was the do everything, right?
Yeah.
I had no choice. If it came to, do we need a website? I got to build a website. Do we need a portal for the students? Okay, we got to build that. We got to, and so I had to learn, a lot of things I didn't already know, just because technology changes all the time, right? And over time, I've really transitioned. For a few years, I had to spend a lot of time counseling my staff. There were days that the only thing I would do for 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 or 14 hours was talk to my staff on the phone, hear them, cry about, it may be about work, it may be about students, it may be about, it may be about their personal life. And I really had to learn as an employer, as an entrepreneur, I had to learn that my job isn't just to try to figure out how to make money, right? Part of that job is I got to be there when my student not my student, rather, well, even my student, but if my staff member calls me on the phone and she's in tears and she says, look, I have a student that just came in, they don't have a place to live, they have a kid, I gave them all the money in my pocket so that they could get some food and diapers. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to, what else can we do? What else is there we can do? And having to learn and teach the staff that, there's a limit, right? As much as we all want to help everybody, you can't. Your house is not big enough for the entire world, kind of thing. But for me, it's still a challenge. I'm a very dialectic person. I do black and white. Shades of gray don't work very well. Yes and no kind of thing. And so there are a lot of times that I've brought in some staff members who are we'll call them student and staff whisperers. They're people who can shore up that weakness in me, because if you call me on the phone and you tell me something that is not what it needs to be, I'm just going to tell you, nope, this is nope. A is A and B is B.
Yeah.
So, learning about myself, that's been a really big challenge. Hearing for the first time, look, you really shouldn't talk to most people. Your personality is such that most people are going to misunderstand what you're saying, and it's not going to work well. That's been a big challenge for me, because I want to be, I love going and visiting the campuses and walking in the classroom, and there's, 20 or 30 or 50 students running around, and I love that feeling.
Sure.
But at the same time, I've had to learn over time that, look, you got to soften up what you say. It cannot just be black and white. You got to, a lot of times my softening at this point, being older and probably a little more set in my ways than I should be, my softening is, hey, you know what? Maybe you should talk to this person, because they can probably help you with that issue. So, there have been and still are challenges. Not so much that I would stop what I'm doing, but there are definitely challenges.
Well, a quick story about my family. My mom was actually an alternative education teacher for many, many years, and kind of like a similar deal. And at that time, there was no remote learning. There were no options beyond going to the classroom, and it was kind of the last stop for a lot of kids. And pointing to what you talked about earlier, it takes a special kind of person to look past some of these difficulties that manifest themselves in different ways that these students face on a daily basis. You got to get past that. You got to focus on what's on the other side, getting them to show up on a daily basis, celebrating those small wins. Those are all such hugely important things. So, I commend you and your staff for doing just that, and obviously recognizing those wins and keeping students engaged and just providing the opportunity. It's ultimately, that's what it takes. It just takes opportunity for a lot of kids to really turn that cycle around and be successful. So I just want to share that with you, that I do understand what you're talking about.
Kudos to your mom, I will tell you. And I will also say, just because I'm a husband and a dad, and I will also say kudos to you. And, I know the stress that it can put on, just personal life. As much as we all love to say work doesn't come home, work comes home. There is only so much we can do as human beings. But I mean, I'm appreciative to hear things like that. I have a staff member. He's an elderly gentleman. I'm not going to give away his age, but he's been with me since almost the beginning. And he is well past the point of retirement. And I often tell him, I really rue the day when you're going to call me and tell me I'm not coming to work anymore. And he says, but I'm never going to do that. He says, I love what I do. I have passion for what I do. And you're the only person that will give me the opportunity to keep doing it. So I'm going to keep coming to work every day. And it's that kind of person, right? And we see right now generations of that not existing anymore. And so part of our eliminating the cycle of poverty, has to do with the fact that we've got to get people past the sense of entitlement into understanding that everything you do, everything you want, everything you will ever have is something that you have to earn.
Right.
It's not just going to be handed to you. So, you know, I again, kudos to your mom. I think that's phenomenal. I love hearing that, you know, we're not the only ones. And of course, I know we're not the only ones. I know who most of my competitors are. But at the same time, I love hearing that there are other schools with as much passion as we have, other educators with as much passion as we have. And not even just the educators. A lot of my staff are not educators. They do other things. They're student service coordinators. They're counselors. They're, you know, a lot of times they're that listening post, that person who can just hear how bad your day was and you know, let us help you and understand that you're not alone. Because again, for this demographic, a lot of them, they're only alone. That's all they know.
Yeah.
Even though they may be surrounded by 100 people, they still feel alone. And so we try to make sure that they understand, you know, I tell the students often, always remember that unlike traditional education, we are not trying to take this box that is our school and fit you inside of it. What we are trying to do is figure out how to move the wall of that box to encompass you into our school. So every student, we've got to figure out, how does that work? What does that mean for you? So, you know, yeah. I can appreciate greatly what you're saying. And I also, just for you personally, I understand some of what you must go through with that being the case.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're kind of getting toward the end of our time, but let me ask you this. You've talked about a lot of, you know, advice that you give or maybe anecdotes that you give out. Can you talk about maybe some either advice that you've received along the way or mentorship that you might have received along the way that kind of just sticks out? Maybe just any short stories that you might be able to share that were impactful for you, that were shared with you, that might have helped you along the way. You know, as you're building the school or elsewhere during your career?
Big things that stick out to me. I think the first one, very young age, like way before business, but my great grandfather once set me down and he told me this all revolved around a country time lemonade in a can, but I owed him $1 for this country time lemonade in a can. And I told him, you know, Papa, I don't have $1. And he says, I'm not worried about the $1. And I said, but I owe you $1. And he says, no. He says, let me tell you like this. For the rest of your life, as long as you live, as long as someone owes you $1, you are never broke. Remember that, no matter what happens. And I have to tell you, I think about that quite often. Today being one of those days, right? When we get to the time for payroll at the month and I'm looking at the bank account and I'm saying, okay, we're fixing to, here we go. The thing is, as long as you're owed $1, you're never broke, right? That's a big one for me. And I think for anybody who's working in business, right? Because especially as an entrepreneur, especially when you're trying to build a business, or even whenever you have a very successful business, there are days that you look at it and you're like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? If you keep that in mind, you don't get that tunnel vision and lose sight of what's coming, right? I learned, again, we kind of touched on this and I'll reiterate this. This actually came from my wife, who used to be on my staff. But I learned from her, who she's much younger than me, but so much more wise sometimes, that she said, look, you can't talk to people. There's nothing wrong with what you say. It's just that the way you say it, they're not going to understand that. It's not the vocabulary they're speaking. So when you say this, they're going to be offended. So you need to let that conversation happen elsewhere, outside of you. And one that I'm a mentor of mine, she has given me, we're about the same age, but she's given me some advice that I'm still struggling with, which is to use the power that I have rather than having the power held over me. And it's specific to some relationships within our business. I'm having a hard time with that because I really don't feel like I have a lot of power. Mostly because I think, as much as I believe in what we do, I also know that there are a lot of competitors. So it makes it very difficult for me sometimes to be able to say, well, look, I may do better than they do. So maybe this thing you're talking about is not what we need to do. So, I struggle with that. I think realizing the macro perspective is something that we all need to do, where I tend to focus on the micro. And part of that is, we want to celebrate every single little success. And I get caught in those weeds and sometimes forget that I need to back off and look from a bird's eye view and see where are we really at. So, that's been great advice that has to be reiterated to me quite often. She calls me and tells me, hey, so stop, look, go outside, look down. What do you see? So, I think that's great advice.
That's good stuff, Benjamin. Now, I appreciate that. Benjamin, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you being a guest on Enterprise Builders. Any last words of wisdom, anything else that you'd like to share?
It was a true pleasure being here. I can't thank you enough for helping us get our story out there. And, I thank you. I appreciate it. And again, kudos to your mom. I think it's a great thing.
Well, thank you. And thanks to your staff, and best of luck going forward, Benjamin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Enterprise Builders podcast. See you again next time, and make sure to click subscribe to get updates on future episodes.